everybody. So we'll continue today's session with Catherine Bearder. She's an MEP and for the group of, ALDE, and member of the Liberal of Lib Dems. And Catherine is a member of a couple of committees in the European Parliament, and I'll just quickly read them out. Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality, delegation to the ACP, EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. And Catherine has been an MEP since 2009, and recently she has authored an important report on the Directive on Human Trafficking, which is an important EU directive. And as I checked on the website, you've also sent some parliamentary questions to the Commission regarding the Erasmus exchange program.
Oh, we get questions all the time.
Yeah,
They're to bother them a lot.
To see how effective or useful this scheme has been for British students, studying in other European countries. And today, Catherine will talk about her role in the European Parliament and also the EU referendum debate, and obviously she's going to provide her reasons for why it's better for Britain to stay in.
Yes.
Okay, so welcome once again.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here. Can you all hear me at the back? Yes, yeah. Good. Okay, if my voice drops, just wave and I'll put it back up again. A lot of probably what I was going to say, I'm sure Richard has said, so if you all start nodding off, I will probably realise that you've heard this already once today. So Richard and I are MEPs for the South East region, and the South East region is enormous. It goes in the north from Banbury and Milton Keynes, all the way down the Hampshire border to the Isle of Wight, includes the Isle of Wight, along the south coast to Kent, and back up through London, everything that isn't London in that great L-shaped wedge, southeast corner of the UK. I think it is probably the wealthiest region in Europe. I have discussions with my London friends, but I think given the number of people, there are nearly 10 million people living in the southeast region, of which about 6.5 million are entitled to vote. That makes it larger than 12 of the member states. So it's a very big, dynamic, hugely important for the UK, but hugely important for Europe as a whole. It is an area of great wealth, Surrey and Sussex and some parts of Berkshire, and huge wealth, huge number of universities, a lot of technology and drivers of the economy, but also areas of great deprivation. There are parts around Southampton that are very difficult, between here and Portsmouth, and there are parts along the Thames estuary that are really challenged when it comes to economy and all the social indicators to make sure that show that it's a very challenged area. So it's a real privilege to represent all those people. Not only am I the Lib Dem MEP for here, I am the only surviving Lib Dem. I'm usually introduced as the last Lib Dem MEP, but on yesterday's results we probably come back with about 5 or 6 MEPs, so the Lib Dems are coming back. But meanwhile I'm having to hold the fort, and I thought I was just going to get elected to go back and do the things that I really care about. What gets me out of bed in the morning, and that's human trafficking and what we're doing to the natural environment. I tend to leave climate change and the big technical things to other people, but I'm married to an ecologist, and so I've seen at first hand really what we're doing to the planet, and it's what we call the silent crisis, the vanishing ecosystems of this planet. So those are the two things that I really get agitated about. And I have, as you said, just finished. In fact, next week in Strasbourg, we sign off the report that I've done. It's now 5 years since we've had a human trafficking directive, which requires all member states to put into their own legislation action to tackle the scourge that is the trade in human beings. And I have long been running a campaign here, and it says, open your eyes, it's happening where you live. And it is happening where you live. Every part of the UK has got trafficked people being controlled and being used and abused. And I'm horrified to say that the UK is one of Europe's largest markets for trafficked people. So there's a lot of work to be done on that, and we were looking at how that has been delivered by the 28 countries. And sadly, not all countries have got legislation yet, and nobody's doing the counting, and and still we have disparities about who is being prosecuted and the types of sentences. So there's still a lot of work to be done on that. The other issue that I fight is, as I said, the environment, the natural environment. And I'm about to start, now I've just got that report out, the report on trafficking of wildlife, which is the third largest, in terms of economy, the third largest criminal activity on the planet. And human trafficking is fourth. And very often they're the same gangs that are doing the same thing. And it starts with rhino horn and ivory, but down to parrots and lizards and frogs and plants and rosewood and all sorts of trees and plants and areas that are being decimated for cash. So there's a huge amount of work to be done there. And so I'm really delighted that I've got that report. I've also just got an award last week. This week, where are we? Friday. This week, on Tuesday, the House of Commons, I was awarded MEP of the Year for the work that I've been doing on the environment and promoting the work that we're doing in the European Union. So I have the Green Ribbon Award, so I'm feeling a bit chuffed this week. So there is a huge scope as an MEP to work on whatever you feel you want to work on. Richard clearly works on budgets, and he has a real interest in finance and the economy. That leaves me cold, but I will fight to the death to protect the human beings and the natural environment that is there in the planet. Our work is very varied, and it's as much as you want to make it, really. I tend to be go over on a Monday, go to Brussels on a Monday and come back up probably a Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday somewhere in the constituency talking to groups like yourselves, or going to see businesses, or working in the office to look at issues, go through the emails and that sort of thing. So it is very varied. I worked out when I first got elected that you probably don't spend more than 4 nights running in the same bed. So I'm constantly on the move. Which, as I get a little older, it gets harder and harder. But it does mean that I have a pretty good view of things that are around me. Last week, I was in Botswana. We had a meeting of the ACP Joint Parliamentary Assembly, and that's the African, Caribbean and Pacific Joint Parliamentary Assembly. So we meet parliamentarians from really is what they call the poorest of the poor on the planet. And that is really very interesting. We take our experiences and they talk to us. And funnily enough, in Botswana we were talking about, this was about the Southern African region. They're talking about the migration crisis. They're talking about the energy crisis, climate change, food security. Gosh, where have we heard all that before? It's what we're talking about in Europe as well. And so they are the same issues. We just have different solutions and different ways of looking at things, but we can take our experiences and work with them. So that's the life of the MEP is varied, but after all these years of campaigning, I'm actually now able to make a real difference, not just locally, but internationally and globally. So it's a really rewarding job, and I could recommend it to anybody, but please don't leave it too long. It took me nearly 20 years to get elected. So it's not the easiest thing. I think probably if I'd been one of the other parties, it might have been a bit quicker, but Lib Dems, you have to pull your way up. So that's a bit about my work, and we can come back to questions, I'm sure, if you want to come back to that. But this June, we're going to face an enormous question. And it's not about the left, the right, the north, the south, the young, the old. This is a huge question for the whole of the UK, and it will impact on the future of the UK for all of you. It's a debate about what we as Britons, it has nothing to do with Europe, and I think sometimes we get tied up in the Europe question, you know, what's the directive and do we have to do this and what's the trade deal and the rest of it. But actually this is all about the UK. Now, I am a patriot, I love this country, I have lived overseas, but we came back to bring our children up here because I love the quirkiness of the Brits, I love the everything about the UK, and I want to see a vibrant, prosperous, secure future for the UK. And we will not have that if we are outside the European Union, floating on our own. We get strength in numbers. And the people I talk to all over, they want to see that too. They want to see prosperity, opportunity and security. So the Lib Dems are fighting very hard for this campaign. And we will be fighting positively. Now, you can't deny that the continent and the EU is going through a huge crisis. There is the migration crisis. And it just, I mean, I can't believe how frustrated I am with the leaders of Europe, that they're building fences when they actually should be building bridges to bring people here to a place of security and safety, and they're shutting the doors on people, and they're not doing and not tackling it at source. We've survived huge financial shocks right across the Union, and there are still some countries with very sluggish economies and huge debt. And talking about huge debt, we've still got enormous debt in this country. So there are problems there, but it seems to me that when times get difficult, the last thing you need to be doing is tearing up the structures that are actually holding us together and keeping us safe. So despite its imperfections and frustrations, the EU remains the most successful peace project the world has ever seen. 60 years of peace. You in this room don't get called up. When I was your age, my mates got called up and had to go off to the army. It's built peace, prosperity and human rights across that whole continent. And it's allowed a stable framework to encourage other countries, those Warsaw Pact countries that used to have their nuclear weapons pointing here at us, are now sitting with me, and your teacher is a testament to that, sitting in the Parliament talking. When we have issues, we talk about them and we sort them out. We don't immediately go to threatening war and rattling sabres. Actually, in Botswana, I was with a German MEP, and we were talking to a school there when we went out on a visit, and he was saying, you know, my great-grandfather was fighting. He lives on the French-German border, and he said my great-grandfather was fighting the French in the Napoleonic Wars. My grandfather was fighting everybody in the First World War, and he said my father was fighting everybody again in the Second World War, and he said I have lived in peace all my life, and I found that very powerful as a testament to what the EU has brought all of us. And of course the truth is, if we left the EU, the refugee crisis would still be a reality. Terrorists, criminals and gangs will still threaten our security. Climate change, air pollution, biodiversity loss will still carry on and threaten our environment, but the UK will be less able to deal with those problems because we will be excluded from the big club where you have huge clout. And our role in the COP21, anybody that will talk to you, and in fact at that award ceremony, Laurent Fabio was there, who was the chair of COP21, and he was saying how important it was that the UK were there, sitting with the rest of the countries, giving their input and making a real change. So, we've had huge benefits. and we still get those huge benefits. And so I think, as a patriot, as somebody who cares about this country, I will be fighting tooth and nail to make sure that we stay in, because we will have a better future for you, for your children, and a more stable and prosperous future. I think I'm going to leave it there, because I'm sure you've got more questions to ask me. Even if you've just asked them from Richard, you might get a slightly different flavour from me. But I'm going to leave it there.
Yeah. Questions from the audience? Either on the EU referendum, the EU deal?
Yeah.
How do you feel about the EU deal that Cameron sort of secured in March? Do you think, because Richard mentioned that he believed that although he wanted the UK to stay in, the EU still needed reform and change. Do you think that this deal will bring some change and reform to the UK and possibly other EU countries?
I don't know that what he's got is not huge change. I think you have to remember that the Brits have got more opt-outs of legislation than any other country. We're not in the Eurozone. We're not in the Schengen zone. So much of justice and home affairs is outside. We don't take part in that. And so to go and ask for yet more sweeties, please, was very difficult for Cameron. It's not only that, it's if you don't give us the sweeties, we're off. We're taking our bat and ball away. So he got some sort of deal, mainly because everybody wanted the UK to stay in, and they realised they'd have to give him something. I think the one bit from that, the thing about ever closer union, that's a phrase, and actually it's a British phrase. It was put in there by John Major and his team when they were doing the Maastricht Treaty. So it's a bit rich for the Brits to now say that they don't want that. Was it the Maastricht Treaty? It might be the one before. But the one thing I think that it's opened the doors on is in the benefit system. Now, actually, we could do that in UK legislation, but I think we have got the most generous benefit system, but it's opened the discussions on benefits. And Germany also is concerned about the way they also give child benefit to parents who are not, where the children are not residents in Germany. I think Sweden does too, but I think the children actually have to be resident in Sweden. But it's opened the door and said, look, we're going to have to talk about benefits, and it's given everybody permission. So I think from the benefit system, I think that's very useful. We were never going to be in the euro anyway. Well, that's the plan at the moment. I still say it might not be in my lifetime, but I think at some point we will join the euro. Once the euro is back and sorted in a world currency, you'll have the dollar, you'll have the euro, you'll have the yuan from China, and then tell me about that the pound's going to hold its own then. So I think at some point, 20 years' time, we might join the euro. So it is a deal. It was a deal enough for him to go back to the Conservatives and say, I've got something, now let's campaign to stay in. And I think, other than in the Conservative forum, it probably won't be much of the discussion in the European debate. What will be is things like sovereignty, migration. Migration is a huge issue, and I think we need to be looking at that. It's a global problem, as I said. Wherever you go in the world, there are people trying to move around, as they have always been, actually. But in times of changing climate, people will, if your farm dries up, you're not going to sit there and say, well, I better not migrate. You're going to have to get up and go somewhere else. And of course, they all have their smartphones now, so they see that there is somewhere else to go to. I mean, 100 years ago, people didn't know what was over the hill far away. So migration is a big issue, and I think actually what we need to be doing is looking at how we deal with that. Like the Germans migrants have to learn German. Why don't we make sure that people who come here learn English? It's much quicker to integrate. Maybe if we have big influxes into, say, Grimsby or somewhere where they're using people in the farming business or Other places where you will get large influxes, then actually say when the numbers hit a certain amount, extra funding goes in there to help with the health services and schools and young people. And that's something that the UK could be doing, because outside the EU, if we want to trade with them, we're going to have to accept migration. And even if we don't have that, as Mr. Farage will tell you, we could have the Australian system. That would actually allow, if you do the figures and look at it, more people into the UK than we have at the moment. So, sorry, I went on a bit longer from your question, but I hope it fills you. Yeah, there was, the chap behind there with the glasses. Yes. Was it? Didn't you want to ask? No? I thought you wanted to hand up. Okay, was it?
As an MEP, how much power do you feel that you actually have in Europe, and how much power does the European Parliament will have in Europe? And also, do you think these should be extended to increase accountability?
We have co-decision powers with the Council. Okay, so on most things, not foreign policy, but on most things we have co-decision power. So the Commission will come forward with legislation, and then we both discuss it. And we have to both houses have to accept the legislation. So in that way, we have a lot of power in what happens in the EU. As an MEP, all MEPs are equal. There is no ruling group, there is no government there. I can put amendments down on any of the reports going through. It would be then for me to build up a coalition of people to support that, and sometimes I'm working with the Greens or the Socialists, sometimes with the EPP, that's the Christian Democrats, or the Conservatives in the ECR. I tend to leave the National Front out and Farage, but they're never there anyway. But even GUI, in the report I've just done on human trafficking, the GUI, what are they? The far left, it's where Sinn Féin sits, where the communists sit. We call it GUI, I'm not quite sure why. But I've even been working with Malin from Sweden on that and doing a lot of work together. So it's what I call grown-up politics, actually. It's none of this butting heads like we do in Westminster. So it is a much more consensual way. It's a much more, it tends to be a bit more long-winded before we get something there, but it is much more considered and much more sensible legislation. It only concerns things that it concerns. We don't do health, we don't do schools, we don't do things that come under the subsidiarity rule that should be best done at member states. We could say, we want 70% of all your waste to be recycled. How it's done in different member states is different in all of them. So it is very broad brush, some of the stuff that we do. Do I have power? Well, yes, I suppose I do. I probably have more power than a backbench MP. I mean, and I'm working internationally, which probably only the Foreign Secretary actually has that same sort of power internationally. So, yes, I mean, I stood a couple of times for Westminster, and then I thought, why am I wasting my time doing this? If I actually want to get stuff done, and I am getting stuff done, stuff that I really care about, then I would much rather go to the European Parliament. I don't know if you know, but MPs can't put amendments down to legislation unless the government accepts them. Sorry, that's not very democratic. I mean, I would rather put the amendment down, and if nobody supports it, okay, it falls. But, you know, that's can be the way democracy works. So, do I have power? Yes, much more than most of my MP friends. Tell them that. Yeah, one right at the back.
I was just wondering, what was your opinion about the social impact and consequences?
Sorry, I can't quite hear.
Okay, I was just wondering, what was your opinion about the social impact and consequences of the withdrawal of the UK? And it seems like European Union and all the issues are like so crammed in our life that we don't really see that much what is from the European Union, what's UK. You know, it's been so many years now. What would happen with, like, obviously there will be economic consequences,
Yeah.
right? But any opinion about this?
Socially, there's probably not a family in the land that hasn't got divorce somewhere in its somewhere in the family. And I think if we were to leave, it would be very like a divorce, especially after long marriage. Unpicking everything would be very difficult. There are no end of agreements, whether it's the single sky agreement that we're working on, or the water quality, or the, all the different parts of agreements we will have to untangle and pull away from. And one of those is the right to live and work or retire anywhere in the European Union. Now, the people who want us to leave will say, no, that's fine, they won't mind us all being there. Well, I'm sorry, they will mind us being there. I have spoken to many, many MEPs, and they're saying, look, if you go, then don't darken our door again, don't whinge and say you want to have free trade area, when at the moment you have access, you have a single market which is way beyond any free trade deal. If you don't want that, go. And so the people who have retired, there are about 2.3 million Brits living elsewhere in the European Union. Their position would be quite interesting. They may well be able to stay there, but they probably have to have visas, which would have to be renewed every month or every year. Or, I don't think the European citizens are going to be particularly aggrieved Brits living there, but their member state will, and they're not going to make it particularly interesting. They certainly wouldn't be able to get their pensions and their health rights in the way that they have at the moment. So you may well find a lot of them will come home. The vast majority of Brits living elsewhere in Europe are retired people, and so that just tell me what's going to happen to the health service then. And then you will start to find, certainly won't attract new people into the UK in the same way that we do now, because they will probably need a visa and the rest of it. So the health service, which is something like 15% of the health service, relies on European workers. They'll start walking away. It won't happen overnight, but you're not going to replace those that move on and move into different jobs. So socially, but also, I mean, you talked about the Erasmus scheme, but the cultural, the town twinning and all I have a son who's a poet, he's a slam poet, and he's in Berlin, working in Berlin and doing, because he can go there and he just loves living in Berlin. He wouldn't be able to. So that cultural exchange would start to unwind and break down. So, yes, economically, it doesn't make any sense at all to me that we should leave. But the ramifications and the withdrawing and the unpicking of all those agreements that we've got and have built up over the years will take a long time. And it will take a long time before we can build up those trade agreements. And I'd just like to know what you're going to say to the chap that's down the road making widgets and selling them to the widget farm in France. Hang on a minute, we've got 2 years, we'll tell you in 2 years on what type of agreement we've got. It doesn't make any sense to me. Whereas at the moment we have access to 28 countries as of right, single patent. We have access into all of those. If any of you invent something new and magical when you graduated from here and you've got something and you want to get on the market, if it's not in that trade agreement, you're going to have to start from scratch again and renegotiate access into those 27 other countries. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
So my question is more related to the leadership of parliamentary power, because I think that's such an interesting topic. So there's this perception that there is a democratic deficit in the EU because most of the power lies in the Commission, which is unelected.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there's also this idea that actually the final say lies with the Council, which means that the EU becomes slightly obsolete because these are sovereign representatives. Do you think that the Parliament should be given more legislative power, even though, like you said, you do have a say?
Coming from the Parliament, I do have some frustrations with, I'm just working on air quality at the moment. And You all know about the Volkswagen scandal and the testing schemes and the rest of it, but it is the government that have given them another 10 years to carry on exceeding the limits by 100%. You know, and we're going, hang on a minute, and they think, oh, but it costs so much money on the air quality. We've got to take methane out and ammonia out because it costs so much money. And we're saying, have you added up the real cost? What it's doing, it's about every percentage point that we're trying to increase is 4,000 deaths every year, you know, and that's, somebody's having to pay for that in the health services. So they do. And yes, I always liken the council arriving a bit like chameleons when they come there around the table, 28 heads or 28 ministers of whatever. Because they've got one eye on the agenda and one eye on the elections back home. They want to come out of that door and say, I've achieved a wonderful thing, and then that'll increase their election. So from a parliamentary point of view, yes it does. But it makes me laugh when you see, especially Lawson, I don't know if anybody looked at Lawson last night, and saying, oh, the democratic deficit in the European Union, when he sits in the House of Lords, which is entirely politically appointed, with 27 places reserved for men only, who are the bishops. I just find that staggering that they can think that that's not, and there's 800 of them. The only other bigger political forum is the Chinese Assembly. I think that's the biggest one. 800 lords, all politically appointed, and they can all go in there and sign on every day and get their money and snooze on the red benches. So, you know, for the Brexiteers to tell me that Europe is undemocratic, it just really, I find that a bit rich. We have politically appointed commissioners, one from each country, who are heads of each department, and at the moment we have Lord Hill, who is, yes, I suppose, he was politically appointed by Cameron, but he got into the Lords without being elected. But there we go, we'll drop that bit from him, but he's doing a good job on finance, the financial regulations, and there's one from each country. And they head up the department, and the Brexiteers will tell you that that's so undemocratic. Well, excuse me, who elects the heads of the county council? Who elects an ambassador? And then they talk about these unelected judges. I don't know that anybody's ever elected a judge. Well, not here, maybe in North Korea they do, or no, so there is somebody that actually, America has a sort of election of judges, but, you know, really, no, the whole point of judges is that they're separate from the political process. But for me, I feel very comfortable at the moment with what we can do, but there are, I think, down the line, they are going to have to get their heads around, the council is going to have to get its head around, are you really European or are you not really European? And that is an issue that will have to come into that, probably the next treaty or the treaty after that. But it's not something that's going to change in time quick, because they like to have, you know, prime ministers love their power.
Do you think it's possible to flout your national allegiance when you become a member of the Commission?
I think so. I think so. I think there's a job to be done, and they do. Some do it better than others. I have a little battle going on at the moment with Commissioner Vella, who is the Commissioner for the Environment, and he comes from Malta. And Malta are shooting turtle doves. Every spring and every autumn, they all go out there with their guns and they shoot these birds. These are highly endangered birds and protected under European law. And I keep saying to them, when I first said to him, oh, but what can I do? I said, well, you're the commissioner. You have to enforce the legislation that we've passed. So he has a problem because he comes from Malta. And it was quite interesting that Juncker did that to quite a few of the commissioners. He gave Lord Hill the banking regulations, where most of the banks sit in London. He gave Vella the issue on the environment. He gave the Greek the portfolio on migration and border control. He gave the Hungarian the portfolio on cultural and press freedom and all the stuff that came with that. So there's some really interesting, and I can't quite work out whether Juncker was being clever or nasty. He gave him some tough jobs. Any more questions? Oh, I finished them off. Yes.
I'm going to ask
Try
a
not
bit.
to move the camera.
I've got a bit of a technical policy question. I don't know if you can answer it, but I'm not often in a room with an MEP, so I'm going to
Yeah, do.
try.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in aviation and its inclusion in.
Very interesting one
Yeah.
around here.
And yeah, absolutely. And it was obviously excluded from the Paris COP last year,
Yeah.
along with
As with shipping.
along with shipping. Yeah, and it was part of the EU emissions trading scheme, and then
Yeah.
they stopped the clock and said we won't do that anymore. Do you think it's likely to? Do you think the EU will be brave enough to try and bring such a contentious topic back
Yeah.
under EU regulation?
It'll have to. Do you know, I heard a horrifying statement the other day. Something like 15 of the world's largest ships annually pollute more than all the motor cars on the planet. 15 of the ships. I mean, these ships are huge. And they're out there, and you know, we don't see it, and it's not damaging our air quality necessarily now, but it's all pumping up there. We have to do that. It is something that the European Union could take to the global stage, because, you know, shipping, of course, is big. We tried it with air, and then, of course, you run into all the problems with a surcharge on every plane that comes in. You cannot fly over or into Europe unless your planes are certified safe. Did you know that? So if you fly with any airline, you have EU protection on those airlines. You can go to Africa and you can fly air, whatever, and you don't know if it's going to land or take off. But in the European Union, every plane has to be up to a certain standard. So we put a surcharge on everybody coming into the European Union, and then you've got places like Kenya who have built up, whatever you think about it, a business in cut flowers. I mean, obvious, but they've got a lot of sunshine there. But they were saying it's really undercutting their business model by putting that, because they all have to be flown in. And so there was a big argument, and we dropped it for a minute. But somehow we are going to have to stop people sticking carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. And one of the ways you do that is by making people pay for it. So I think some other deal will come back. And, you know, the European Union is the biggest trading bloc on the planet. So it has huge clout. And I think if we do it, as long as we don't get Trump in America and we can keep the rest of the world on board, the next time they come back for the COP22, then they will have to look at that, because if we've managed to get everybody else's emissions down, we're going to have to look at the other ones that are still polluting badly. Yes?
In case you can Leipzig, do you think or anyone would follow after and
Well,
try to do it? Because it seems like they sound willing to at least shout about it.
Denmark are as grumpy about the European Union as we are. Hungary is being led by somebody who is not as pro-European as... Are you from Hungary? No, you smiled when I said that. Orban is trying everybody's patience, and we're trying to do things there. Yes, of course, that it will be part of... What happens is if we vote to leave on the 23rd of June, okay, they say, the door's shut, we will now decide, the 27 remaining, will decide on what deal you will be given. Come back, we've got 2 years in which we can work out, and we will give you the deal. And that deal will be a deal that will not encourage anybody else that want to do the same. Okay, so to hear the Farage and Boris, you think this divorced couple are going to say, well, here's the front door keys, and come and use the sitting room and the kitchen whenever you like. Just use the house as if it's still yours. I'm sorry, they won't have a deal like that. It will be a deal that will be quite tough to stop anybody else even thinking about it. Which is why the Irish are really concerned about what is going to happen. because we are their biggest trading partner. They are our biggest trading partner, and they will still want to be, and they still are will remain in the EU, and so we'll have to comply with those rules of the EU. So if we want to trade with Ireland, we're going to have to comply with the EU rules, but we won't have any say in the setting of it. That's crazy. Okay. I'm going to tell you about the leaflets I've got down here. I've got lots of leaflets. These are not mine. These are European Commission leaflets. One on creative people, one for academics, scientists and researchers. What does the EU mean for us, under 25s, shoppers and consumers, and students? So I've got lots of these here. If you want to take, if you've still got any questions, do come and take some of these leaflets. And I've also got some of these, which are my human trafficking leaflet, which on the back tells you all the signs to look out for, because I want you to be out there looking and spotting signs of people being trafficked, and phone in. And if you don't want to phone the police, you can phone Crime Stoppers. But those I'd like out in some public area that you can put them in. So I think that's probably it. Is everybody registered to vote that can vote? Are you registered to vote? Where will you be on the 23rd of June? Norway. Okay, get your postal vote sorted. Get that postal vote sorted very quickly. If you've got friends and relatives who don't live in the UK, and most families have got somebody that lives somewhere else in the world, they haven't been away for more than 15 years, they still have the right to vote. Even if you're living in California or Brazil or wherever, they can still apply online, and they've got until, is it the 18th of May? It's not long now. They can apply for a vote and a postal vote, and they can do that too. So please, if you've got Auntie Mary who emigrated to Wisconsin, whatever, drop her an email and say, make sure you get that vote, because your future depends on it. It's not her future. It's not your grandparents' future. It's not your parents' future. It's your future and your future children. So, make sure you vote in, and thank you again for inviting me to come and talk.
Thank you, Catherine, for coming.